She was trained to please, she was trained to serve, and now, discarded, defeated, stripped of armor, she stood before him, no orders, no rank, no mission, just an unspoken invitation. Use me. Take what's left. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at her. And in that silence, she understood what she had become. She swore never to kneel again. Then he found her. The orbital elevator station was a skeleton picked clean, a monument to a world that had fallen silent. Rust bloomed like a disease across its vast, skeletal frame, and the low planetary orbit kept it in a perpetual, creaking dance with the dying light of a distant sun. Here, gravity was a suggestion, a gentle tug that made every step a deliberate float, every dropped tool a slow, drifting descent. Dane Mercer, former elevator technician and ex-soldier, moved through its decaying arteries with the practiced grace of a man who had long ago made peace with ghosts. His life was a series of measured, solitary tasks. Check the atmospheric scrubbers. Monitor the failing solar arrays. Patch the hull breaches that wept thin, precious air into the void. And always listen. Listen for the telltale scuff of magnetic boots that weren't his own, the faint clang of metal on metal that meant a scavenger had breached the outer locks. Most were desperate, half-starved fools looking for anything to trade for a few more hours of oxygen. He usually let them take what they could, so long as they didn't come near his core modules. His isolation was his sanctuary, bought with a dishonorable discharge and the quiet, crushing weight of past atrocities. Today, the sound was different. Not the clumsy scramble of a scavenger, but something softer, a strained rasp, deep within the lower maintenance ducts. Too regular for a failing system, too organic for a structural groan. He paused, his hand going to the worn grip of the single pistol holstered at his hip. His eyes, the color of deep space, narrowed. He pulled a worn comlink from his belt, its static hiss, a familiar companion. Mercer, too. No one, he muttered, a dry, humorless habit. Movement in section Gamma 7, possible breach. He drifted silently down the access shaft, his magnetic boots clicking softly against the grated floor. The lights here were failing, flickering like dying embers, casting long, dancing shadows that played tricks with the eye. The air grew stale, thick with the smell of ozone and old dust. He reached the access panel for GAMMA 7, its ancient locking mechanism groaning as he cycled it open. A gust of frigid, unconditioned air hit him, carrying with it a faint metallic tang. He peered into the darkness, his pistol raised. Sua. And then he saw her. She was huddled in a tangle of exposed conduits, her form barely discernible in the gloom. Tall, even hunched, with the unmistakable lithe build of a Xiri warrior. Her skin, a dull, bruised blue in the flickering light, was caked with grime and what looked like dried blood. Her clothes were shredded, clinging to her emaciated frame like a second skin. She was trying to hide, but her ragged, wet cough echoed painfully in the confined space. He moved forward, a silent, predatory glide. He expected a desperate lunge, a futile attack. He got it. With a sudden, guttural snarl that was more animal than alien, she launched herself at him. Her hands, tipped with blunt, broken claws, raked for his face, her eyes burning with a feral, desperate fire. But there was no strength in the attack. It was a dying flicker, a last, defiant spasm. Her movements were slow, uncoordinated, her breath a ragged gasp. He easily deflected her, her weak blows glancing off his armored forearm. He didn't need to use force, her own body betrayed her. She collapsed against the bulkhead with a choked cry, sliding down the grimy metal. A fresh bloom of dark, viscous blood blossomed on her lips, dripping onto her chin, stark against her blue skin. Her body convulsed, a violent, rattling cough tearing through her. She gasped, clawing at her chest, her eyes wide with terror and a profound, agonizing pain. She was drowning in her own lungs. Dane watched her, his expression impassive. He noted the precise shade of blue in her skin, the way her muscles spasmed, the shallow, ineffective breaths. Xiri warrior. He knew their kind. Bred for combat, for discipline, for loyalty. And now, this. A broken thing, coughing out her life in a forgotten duct. He saw the shrapnel scars on her side, old wounds, poorly healed, and the faint, telltale discoloration around her ribs that spoke of internal bleeding. Lung damage. Slow, agonizing. He holstered his pistol. He didn't speak. He simply reached down, his large, gloved hand closing around her shoulder. She flinched, a raw, terrified sound escaping her throat, her body tensing for the expected blow, the violation. But he didn't strike. He simply hauled her up, her light, emaciated form surprisingly easy to lift in the low gravity. He slung her over his shoulder, her limp limbs dangling, and began the long, silent trek back through the station's decaying corridors. The journey was a blur of flickering lights and echoing silence for Rethari. She was barely conscious, drifting in and out of a haze of pain and disorientation. Each jolt, each shift of the human's body beneath her, sent fresh agony through her chest. She expected a prison, a cage, a dark cell where she would be left to die, or worse, to be used. She had known such places. She had sworn never to kneel again, never to serve. And yet, here she was, utterly helpless, at the mercy of a human. The shame was a dull ache, even through the pain. She could feel the hard, unyielding muscle of his shoulder beneath her, the steady, rhythmic thud of his magnetic boots. He was strong, unstoppable, and she was nothing. When she finally drifted back to full consciousness, it was to a dim, flickering light and the faint, sterile smell of antiseptic. She opened her eyes slowly, her vision blurry, then sharpening. She was lying on a cot, a thin, scratchy blanket pulled up to her chin. Her chest was tightly bandaged, the pain still there but muted, distant. A low, rhythmic hiss filled the air, an oxygen concentrator. She moved her arm, testing. No chains. No restraints. She sat up slowly, wincing as her muscles protested. The room was small, utilitarian, filled with medical equipment. A battered diagnostic console, shelves of sterile packets, a single, humming medbed. She was alone. Alone? Her mind, accustomed to the brutal logic of capture, struggled to comprehend. She was not dead. She was not violated. She was not imprisoned. The expected price, the inevitable degradation, had not been exacted. She swung her legs over the side of the cot, her feet touching the cold, grated floor. Her body felt weak, but the air was clean, sharp with oxygen, filling her lungs without the agonizing burn. She stood, swaying slightly, and walked to the door. It was closed, but not locked. She pushed it open, a faint hiss of air as it cycled. The corridor beyond was dark, stretching into the station's silent, empty vastness. Hours passed. She explored the immediate vicinity, a small, functional refresher, a narrow galley with a humming nutrient dispenser. She ate the bland, protein paste, her stomach protesting, then slowly accepting the nourishment. She drank the purified water. She waited. For him, for the catch, for the price. Finally, she heard the soft click of magnetic boots approaching. Dane Mercer. He appeared in the corridor, carrying a large, sealed container. He paused when he saw her standing there, watching him, her eyes wide, still searching for answers. He didn't react, didn't change his expression. He simply walked past her into the galley, set down the container, and began to sort its contents. Rethari followed him, her steps hesitant. She watched him work, his movements efficient, his face a mask of detached calm. He didn't acknowledge her presence, didn't look at her. "Where is the price?" she asked, her voice raspy, unused but firm. The words felt alien on her tongue, a question she had always known the answer to, until now. There's always a price. He didn't stop sorting. He pulled out a bowl of rehydrated protein, set it on the counter, and pushed it towards her. His gaze remained fixed on the contents of the container. He said nothing. He simply turned and walked away, his boots clicking softly down the corridor, leaving her with the food, the silence, and the bewildering, unbearable absence of a price. Days blurred into a strange, disorienting rhythm. Rethari spent her waking hours in the infirmary. The oxygen concentrator, a constant, hissing companion, a reminder of the shrapnel slowly tearing at her lungs. Her body was healing, slowly, painfully. But her mind remained a maelstrom of confusion. Dane Mercer was an enigma. He provided food, clean air, and silence. He did not demand. He did not touch. He did not explain. Her body was healing. She began to follow him, a shadow in the decaying corridors of the orbital station. She observed him, studying his movements, his habits, searching for the pattern, the weakness, the price. He was a creature of routine. Every cycle, he would move through the station's skeletal structure, checking the failing life support systems. She watched him patch hull breaches, his large, gloved hands precise and strong as he sealed the weeping cracks with sealant. She saw him climb into the vast, hollowed-out control room, its consoles dark and dead, where he would sit for hours, staring at a single flickering screen. He was always reading. Ship logs, she realized. Ancient, scrolling data, filled with names and dates and cargo manifests. What was he searching for? What secrets did this silent human hold? She also noticed the room. A single, sealed hatch, deeper within his core module, that he never entered. It was always locked, its surface smooth and unmarred, unlike the rust and grime that coated everything else. A mystery. A locked box in the heart of the enigma. Her own body, despite the oxygen, was failing. The pain in her chest was a dull, constant ache, flaring into a sharp, tearing agony with every cough. The blood she coughed up was less now, but still present, a grim reminder of the clock ticking inside her. She needed more than just oxygen. She needed proper medical attention, a way to remove the shrapnel, a way to live. One cycle, as Dane was meticulously cleaning a clogged air filter in the main module, Rethari tried to be useful. She found a stack of discarded, grimy tools and began to sort them, wiping away the dust and rust with a scrap of cloth. She worked in silence, her movements careful, hoping he would notice, hoping he would acknowledge her effort, her potential. He glanced at her once, his gaze flat, then returned to his work, his indifference, a cold, sharp blade. She tried to fix a flickering light panel in the galley, her warrior's mind, accustomed to intricate machinery, attempting to make sense of the human schematics. She managed to stabilize it for a few minutes before it failed again. He walked past her, saw the flickering light, and simply reached up to disconnect the power, plunging the section back into dimness. He ignored her efforts. He ignored her. The rage, a familiar friend from her concubine days, began to simmer. She wanted to scream, to lash out, to force a reaction from him. But what was the point? He was immune to her anger, immune to her desperation. He was a wall of cold, impassive stone. And then, the rage began to curdle, twisting into something far more insidious, a profound, aching insignificance. She was nothing to him. Not a warrior, not a concubine, not even a threat. Just a problem he had chosen, for some unfathomable reason, to keep alive. One night, the pain in her lung became unbearable. A deep, tearing cough racked her body, bringing with it a fresh gush of blood that stained her thin tunic. She stumbled from the infirmary, gasping, desperate for something more, something to make the agonies stop. She found Dane in his main module, hunched over a console, the flickering light of a data screen illuminating his stark features, She walked towards him, her breath ragged, each step an effort. Her hands, trembling, reached for the edge of the console, bracing herself. She had nothing left to lose. She had tried to be useful, and he had ignored her. She had tried to fight, and she had collapsed. Now, there was only one thing left to offer, the last currency of her broken existence. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled the tattered tunic over her head, letting it fall to the floor. The cool, stale air of the module brushed against her bare skin, raising goosebumps. The shrapnel scars on her side, ugly and raised, were stark against her bruised blue skin. Her body, once honed for battle, then softened for pleasure, was now a testament to starvation and injury. She was not beautiful anymore. The thought was a bitter truth, a final humiliation. "I'm not beautiful anymore," she whispered, her voice raw with effort, her chest heaving for air. "But I was trained to please. I was trained to serve. Let me be useful." Her hands, still trembling, reached out, not to touch him, but to hover inches from his arm, an unspoken invitation, a desperate plea for purpose. Dane didn't even look at her. His gaze remained fixed on the data scrolling across the screen, his expression utterly blank. He didn't flinch, didn't react, didn't acknowledge her nakedness, her desperate offer. He simply continued to monitor the flickering numbers. His voice, when it finally came, was flat, devoid of any emotion, as if he were speaking to a faulty piece of equipment. "Get dressed before you pass out. There's oxygen in medbay. Use it." The words were a hammer blow, not anger, not disgust, just indifference. She felt a surge of white-hot rage, a primal scream trapped in her throat. He had seen her most vulnerable, most desperate, most humiliating offering, and he had dismissed it as a medical emergency. She was not even worth the transaction. The rage burned, then faded, leaving behind a cold, desolate confusion. And then, something worse. Far worse. A profound, crushing insignificance. She was nothing. Her body, her training, her very being, it meant nothing to him. She was utterly, completely insignificant. Rethari spent the next few cycles in a haze of this new, crushing insignificance. Her body, though slowly recovering, felt like a cage for a spirit that had been utterly defeated. The oxygen concentrator's hiss was a constant reminder of her dependence, her weakness. She avoided Dane, retreating to the infirmary, trying to make sense of his baffling indifference. He had saved her, healed her, fed her, but for what? Not for her body, not for her service. The lack of a price was the most tormenting price of all. One day, driven by a desperate need for answers, or perhaps just to escape the suffocating weight of her own thoughts, she ventured deeper into the station. She found the outer airlocks, their massive rusted doors sealed shut. She tested the manual overrides, her warrior's knowledge of mechanical systems kicking in, but they were dead, completely inert. No power, no way out. She found Dane in the main control room, hunched over his console, the flickering data screen illuminating his face in the gloom. He looked up as she entered, his eyes, as always, unreadable. "You trapped me here," she accused, her voice low, a raw edge of desperation in it. "You brought me here, healed me, and now you've trapped me." The words were a desperate lunge, a challenge, anything to provoke a reaction, to find the hidden game. He didn't respond. His gaze simply returned to the screen, his fingers moving over the dark, dead console. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the faint hum of the station's failing systems. He let her accusation hang in the air, unanswered, unacknowledged. His indifference was a weapon, sharper than any blade. "Iya." Rethari watched him, her rage simmering, then slowly, painfully, turning into a cold, analytical curiosity. Why? Why keep her here? If not for her body, not for her service, not for a price, then why? Later that night, unable to sleep, she returned to the control room. The console was still on, not in sleep mode, not locked, and the file open on the screen was hers. Her breath hitched. For a moment, she dared to hope. Maybe he was searching for a cure. For them. For her. But the words on the screen were not medical. They were war records. Detailed manifests of human military operations, troop movements, casualty reports. And then, she saw it. Files of missing persons. Refugees. Xiri, like her, their names. Their last known locations. Their presumed fates. She scrolled through them, a cold dread creeping through her veins. And then, her own name. Rethari Vei. Xiri warrior class. Captured. Presumed KIA. But beneath it, a smaller, almost hidden note. Possible concubine transfer. Camp Omega 7. Her breath hitched. Camp Omega 7. The place where she had been broken. The place she had sworn to forget. He had been watching. Not her. Not her specifically. But them. The missing. The lost. The presumed dead. She felt a surge of cold guilt, a phantom shame, for having looked, for having stumbled into this trap he had so subtly laid. He wasn't here, but somehow, it felt like he was watching anyway. She scrolled further, recognizing names, faces from her past. Warriors. Civilians. Children. All listed as missing, or transferred, or disappeared. And then she saw the dates of the atrocities, the massacres, the moments of betrayal that had shattered her world, and next to them, the names of the human commanders, the units involved. His unit. He wasn't a scavenger, he wasn't a captor. He was a witness. A profound, chilling realization dawned on her, colder than the vacuum outside. He wasn't waiting to hurt her. He wasn't waiting to exploit her. He was waiting for something far more insidious. The sealed hatch was still there, deeper within his core module. Smooth, clean, untouched. Her hand hovered over the manual release. But she didn't press it. Not yet. "You're not waiting to hurt me," she whispered into the silent, echoing control room, her voice barely audible. "You're waiting for me to hurt myself." The words were a truth that settled deep in her bones, a terrifying, liberating understanding. He had already won. And he hadn't lifted a finger. The revelation from the war logs was a cold, bitter truth that settled deep in Rethari's bones. Dane Mercer wasn't a monster in the way she understood monsters, the ones who took, who exploited, who broke bodies. He was something far more unsettling, a silent observer, a witness to her kind's suffering, a man who seemed to derive a strange, passive power from the unraveling of others. The knowledge that he had orchestrated her discovery of the files, leaving them open like a trap, fueled a new kind of resentment, colder and more calculating than her previous rage. He wanted her to break, to succumb to her own history. She wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Her lung, however, had other plans. The brief respite from the oxygen concentrator had been a cruel illusion. The pain returned with a vengeance, a constant burning pressure that intensified with every shallow breath. One morning, a particularly violent fit of coughing left her gasping, her vision blurring, a fresh, alarming quantity of dark blood blooming on the infirmary floor. She stumbled back to the medbed, clutching her chest, the rhythmic hiss of the oxygen concentrator suddenly sounding like a death knell. She was fading, faster now. Dane found her later, slumped against the medbed, barely conscious, her skin a sickly, mottled blue. He didn't speak. He simply moved with the same detached efficiency she had come to expect. He adjusted the oxygen flow, injected something cool and numbing into her arm, and monitored the flickering readouts on the diagnostic console. He stabilized her. quietly, without a word, without a glance that betrayed anything beyond clinical assessment. Rethari watched him through a haze of pain and medication. His face was a mask, his movements precise. He was saving her, again. And the question, the one that had tormented her since she first woke on this station, clawed its way to her lips. "Why?" she rasped, her voice weak, barely a whisper. "Why not take what everyone else took?" The words were a challenge, an accusation. She needed to understand. She needed him to break his silence, to reveal the true nature of his game. Dane paused. His fingers, which had been adjusting a dial on the oxygen concentrator, stilled. He turned, slowly, his gaze finally meeting hers. His eyes, dark and fathomless, held a depth she hadn't seen before, a flicker of something ancient and weary. "Because I've lived both ends of that trade," he said, his voice low, a gravelly whisper that seemed to echo with distant, forgotten horrors. It wasn't an explanation, not truly, but a statement of shared experience, a brutal empathy that was more chilling than any cruelty. It was the first true crack in his impenetrable facade, and it terrified her more than his indifference ever had. Rethari didn't kneel. The thought of it, the memory of the concrete grinding into her thighs, the shame of those desperate offers, was a visceral pain. She had bled on her knees, had broken on them. But here, now, it wasn't about humiliation. It was about breath, existence, gravity. She sat instead, because kneeling was for offerings, sitting was for staying. She slid from the medbed to the cold, grated floor, her legs folding beneath her. Her head lowered, her gaze fixed on the worn magnetic boots of the human before her. It was not the abject surrender of before, but a different kind of submission, a recognition of his power, yes, but also of her own utter, inescapable need. "Then let me stay," she whispered, her voice raw, stripped of all pretense. It was not an offer of flesh, or service, or pleasure. It was a plea for existence. Just stay. The silence that followed was different this time, not heavy with judgment, but thick with unspoken weight. Dane watched her, his expression unreadable. He didn't move. The faint hiss of the oxygen concentrator filled the void. Then he nodded. Once, a curt, almost imperceptible movement of his head, and then, almost as an afterthought, he reached forward, not to touch her, but to reset the oxygen dial. Just slightly. "Oxygen is yours," he said, his voice flat, but with a new, subtle finality. Nothing else. He turned, his boots clicking softly on the grated floor, and walked away, leaving her on the cold floor, her lungs burning, but her heart a strange mix of terror and a fragile, bewildering relief. The game had changed, and she was still alive. Days turned into a new, fragile coexistence. Rethari moved through the station with a different purpose now, no longer searching for an escape, but for a way to simply be. The infirmary became her sanctuary, the oxygen concentrator a constant, life-giving hum. Dane continued his routines, his presence a silent, watchful anchor. They rarely spoke, but the air between them was no longer thick with accusation or desperate pleading. It was filled with a tension born of shared space and unspoken understanding. One cycle, the station groaned, not the usual creak of decaying metal, but a deep, shuddering tremor that vibrated through the deck plates. The lights, already flickering, began to strobe violently, plunging sections of the station into sudden, terrifying darkness before flaring back to a sickly yellow glow. The rhythmic hum of life support systems sputtered, then died, replaced by a high-pitched whine that escalated into a piercing alarm. Dane was in the main module, hunched over his console, when the alarms shrieked. His face, illuminated by the frantic flashing of warning lights, was grim. Rethari, in the infirmary, felt the sudden drop in air pressure, the faint, acrid smell of ozone and burnt wiring. Her lungs, already compromised, burned. Dane appeared in the infirmary doorway, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held an urgency she hadn't seen before. He didn't speak. He simply gestured, a curt, commanding motion towards his own quarters. The very room with the locked hatch, the one he never entered. Rethari hesitated, a flicker of the old fear, the old suspicion, rising. Was this a trap? Was this the final, cruel twist? To lead her into his inner sanctum only to seal her fate? But the alarms were screaming, the station dying around them. Her lungs were burning. She had no choice. She stumbled into his quarters. The room was small, Spartan, dominated by the cot and a single, reinforced console. Dane followed her, his movements swift. He slammed the heavy hatch shut, the seal hissing as it engaged. Then, he moved to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. The lights in the room, already dim, brightened slightly, a steady, unwavering glow. She heard the faint, steady hum of a localized power conduit, diverted solely to this small space. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, but with an undeniable finality. "Power is diverted. Oxygen will hold for days, maybe weeks." He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned, opened the hatch, and stepped out into the chaotic, dying station, sealing the door behind him. Darkness. And then, the silence. A profound, terrifying silence, broken only by the steady hum of the diverted power and the frantic beating of Rethari's heart. He was gone. He had sealed her in. Safe, while he went to face the dying station alone. Days passed. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant, muffled groans of the station, the occasional shudder. By the third cycle, her thoughts turned inward. She spoke to herself, out loud sometimes. Not words, just fragments, things she used to say as a warrior, then as a captive, then as nothing at all. She ate the nutrient paste, drank the water, conserved her strength. But the fear was a constant companion. She imagined him out there, fighting the failing systems, succumbing to the vacuum, to the cold, to the crushing weight of the station's demise. He was dead. He had to be. He had saved her, only to sacrifice himself. The thought was a bitter, unexpected ache. Then, on what she guessed was the fourth cycle, the hatch hissed. Dane stood in the doorway, a ghost in the flickering light. He was burned, scorched marks on his bare arms and torso, his breathing ragged, a deep, hacking cough tearing through him. His eyes were bloodshot, exhausted, but alive. He swayed slightly, bracing himself against the doorframe, a testament to sheer will. Rethari stared at him, her mind reeling. He was alive. He had done it. He had fixed it. The station's hum was returning, a faint, steady thrum that spoke of life support stabilizing. Her hand didn't tremble. It didn't hover. It found his scarred fingers against calloused skin. Firm. Final. Nothing more. "I'm not kneeling," she whispered, her voice raw with emotion, a declaration that felt like a lifetime of defiance. Dane's gaze